My name is Mike Harris. I'm going to speak this afternoon about how does Deming's work on quality help us. I'm going to speak for about 30 minutes, and after that I'll be happy to take questions for you. First of all, say a couple of things about myself. I currently work for Geckboard, where I'm an own tester, and we help people share data from creating dashboards such as this one here, which you can then share on in Slack or on email. I'm also the program secretary of SIGIS. But I'm going to talk to you about W. Edwards Deming. Now, I think probably most of your C-suite know about W. Edwards Deming. And I can guarantee that all of the Agile coaches you've ever worked with know about W. Edwards Deming. And probably quite a number of them describe him as their favourite person. I think testers should know about W. Edwards Deming too. And that's why I'm giving the talk. I think we should know about Deming because if we understand Deming's philosophy, we understand Lean much better, we understand Agile much better. And he was known as, is known as the grandfather of quality. And if we understand Deming better, we will understand quality better. And quality is obviously very important for us as testers. And I think this sort of knowledge will help you with testing, and it will also help you if you want to go into management. I became interested in Deming when I was working with Suki, actually, there in that room. And I first started to work in Lean and Agile teams, and I decided to read a lot about Lean and Agile and find out what they were. And I found that nearly all of the books mentioned this fellow Deming. And when I realised he was so important, Lean and Agile, I read a bit more about him. And I found that actually he was really important in understanding quality as well. So as a tester working in an Agile team, that was really very important. So I became interested in Deming and read a lot more about him. And through that, I came to learn a lot more about what Lean and Agile were and where those ideas came from. But before I start, I have one slide about Lean. When I started to read about Lean, I found that Lean is an American description of Japanese production systems. The phrase Lean comes from a study done by MIT. And one of their researchers wrote a research paper in which they said Lean production systems, so Japanese productions are lean because they do more than mass-produced production systems with less. And coming out of this study as well is a book called Machine That Changed the World, which I recommend. It's an analytical history of car manufacturing, which doesn't sound terribly interesting, but it's engineering. And we all do engineering, so actually we can relate to an awful lot of what's in there. The primary interest in this study is the Toyota production system. While this was going on, Mary Poppendieck, as I understand it by herself, actually sat and took the Toyota production system and applied it to software development. And with her husband Tom, she published 4 books about lean software development. Most well-known one is Lean Software Development and Agile Toolkit. When I looked at Agile, I found Agile was quite different. Agile has a different history. If you think of Agile as being iterative and incremental development, you can say that it started in the 1930s with Bell telephones using the Schuhart cycle. And I'll talk more about the Schuhart cycle later on. If you move forward from the 1930s to the 1950s, independently of the Schuhart cycle, IBM had a software development team that worked in an iterative way. One of the engineers on the team was Jerry Weinberg, and he said that it felt very natural, and I think the team manager was a friend of von Neumann, and he just assumed this is how von Neumann saw software development. At the same time as this was going on, America was building the X-15 jet. Now, if you've seen the film about Neil Armstrong called The First Man, this is the jet he was flying at the beginning of the film when he was walking around the outside of the Earth's atmosphere. And the engineers who worked on that worked in an iterative way, and the project was regarded as a success. And they went on to work for NASA, and they influenced NASA to work in an iterative way. NASA engineers then influenced NASA software engineers to work in an iterative way. In the early 1960s, on the Mercury project, NASA software engineers wrote their tests before they wrote their code. They used iterations, and they used time boxing. And if you look at the whole of the NASA program to put astronauts on the moon, it's iterative and incremental development. Mercury program put 1 astronaut in space. Gemini program put 2 astronauts in space. The Apollo program put 3 astronauts in space. And once they had done that, they put the Apollo in space with a lunar module, and they went round the moon, and then of course they landed on the moon. It's iterative and incremental engineering. If you move forward then from NASA, the next big thing I picked out was Schwaber and Sutherland presenting Scrum for the first time in 1995. Scrum is the most widely used agile methodology today. And if you move forward from that, it's 2001, and there's the Agile Manifesto. I found it very interesting that so much of Agile was in place when the Agile Manifesto was written, so much had happened before that. But then why talk about Deming? I have to say, I've brightened up my slide with pictures of Toyota cars because Toyota production system is the primary interest in the study of Lean, so I thought it brightened it a bit. Well, we can talk about, why do we want to talk about Deming? Deming believed quality was central to success, so do we. And he worked with Japanese industry after World War II, and Japan had a negative net worth, and it helped it grow to become a global success. When he worked with Japan, they had no oil, no gas, no coal. At that time, they had no timber, and they had a reputation for shoddy goods. I also read that 70% of their ports were destroyed, and 40% of their cities had been destroyed. And he went in there and worked with Japanese industry and helped them to create the global success which they are today. I also looked for a quote which describes Deming's importance. I found this quote from David Anderson in his book about Kanban. Deming is occasionally mentioned as perhaps the most important management scientist of the 20th century. And in my opinion, this is greatly deserved. Deming's ideas, as I'll show later on, have influenced both Agile and Lean. And he's still widely referred to, and his ideas, although he died 20 years ago, are still causing innovations today. This is a book I took out of our office, Competing Against Luck. It's the book about jobs theory, and it's largely based on, jobs theory is largely based on Deming's ideas. That's Deming quality, and quality also interests us. What did Deming say quality is? He says quality can be defined only in terms of the agent. The way to see that, to understand that, is to think about a book. What agents are there in a book? Well, the first agent in the book is the writer. And for the writer, quality could be, did they manage to tell the story that they wanted? Did they manage to get over the points that they wanted? Another agent for a book could be the printer. The printer quality is something to do with the quality of the ink, the quality of the paper, and the size of the print run. Another agent for the book would be the publisher. Now, for the publisher, quality could quite simply be how many books did I sell? And of course, another agent for the book would be the reader. And for the reader, quality would be something like, was it an exciting read? Was it a good book? Was there some spark of information? I find this an interesting and useful definition of quality because what it tells you is quality is subjective. So if you're thinking about your teams where you're working, quality to a back-end developer is quite different to that quality of a front-end developer. And their perspectives will be quite different to a product owner. If you think about your customers as well, you'll have customers who use your products in different ways, who gain different benefits from them. Well, they're all different agents, and this definition helps you understand that and see those differences. Deming also said that customers don't know what they want to buy in 3 years' time. I forget the exact words, they're in my speaker notes, which I can't see. But he said in 3 years' time, people don't know what they want to buy. And here he's talking about innovation. Innovation is a very important part of quality as well. But why is quality important? Deming says quality is important because quality improves productivity. We all know we produce good quality code, we spend less time fixing bugs. Deming went beyond that. He says that good quality causes a chain reaction. If you improve quality, you will improve productivity. If you improve productivity, you will lower your costs. And if you lower your costs, you will capture the market. If you think about, for us, if we improve quality, we don't have to fix so many bugs. We can make lots of nice new features for the product owner to attract new customers. That's because we've got lower costs because we're not spending time fixing bugs. And that way we can capture the market. So this thing was put forward in 1950, it still holds true today. And he gives an example, actually. He went to visit a Japanese factory. It's back in the 1950s. And in the factory, they had a number of production lines. And at the end of each production line, there was an inspector. And the inspector checked the quality of goods coming off the production line. And if they weren't good enough, they got sent to another production line called rework. But then reworked, and they were checked by an inspector again. If they were good enough, they went off to the customer. Now, when Deming saw this factory, he asked the factory manager, what proportion of your staff work on the rework production line? And the factory manager said it was 21% of his staff. And Deming's next question was, well, if 21% of your staff are actually fixing substandard goods on the rework production line, would it be fair to say that another 21% of your staff are actually making those substandard goods? And the factory manager said yes. So nearly half the factory staff were either making or fixing substandard goods. What Deming said to the factory manager is he should remove the inspectors from the end of the production lines and stop trying to inspect quality in, and instead should start to try and build quality in by having operational definitions at each stage of production. And that way you know what was required at each stage. You won't need the inspector at the end of the production line, and you won't need the rework production line. Everybody can be making new goods. Deming says that the factory manager followed his advice. They were able to improve quality, improve productivity, and the factory flourished. I rather like the story because it reminds me of the first development team I ever worked in. The testers were at this end of the room, and the developers were at that end of the room. And the director made sure we didn't talk to each other because we would be wasting each other's time. What this actually meant is that testers this end of the room, we only tested code that was complete. We were the inspectors at the end of the production line. And when we found a bug, developers had to stop what they were doing and fix it so that we could carry on testing. And I'd say today, when I'm working at Gettable, we try not to do that. We're trying to actually work together to build quality in rather than actually trying to inspect it in at the end of the process. Operational definitions. What are these operational definitions that Deming was talking about? They were really very powerful. And what Deming says, an operational definition puts communicable meaning into a concept. And he says, adjectives like good or reliable have no meaning until they're expressed in terms of sampling, testing criteria. I always think this is really useful, and I have it at the back of my mind when I go to planning, because I'm sure all of us at some point in our career have been to a planning meeting when we've been told, we're going to make a better new feature. It's going to be faster. It's going to be more reliable. And actually, how do we know that? We've got to test that. We can't test that something's better. We need to think about this and having terms of sampling, testing criteria. And in many ways, that's our role at planning, to ask those questions, to make sure that things are defined in such a way as they can be tested. And the developers actually know what they've been creating. Now I'm going to come on to talk about the Deming Cycle. The Deming Cycle is what Deming is best known for, and it is a form of Agile. It's an incremental and iterative development methodology. In the 1930s, Walter Schuhart was an engineer at Bell Telephone Labs, and he encourages engineering teams to use what he called what came to be known as plan, do, study, act cycles, because he observed that teams that followed these cycles produce better quality work. Deming worked for Walter Schuhart at Bell Telephones, and he went on to work from the 1930s on and collected his lectures, which is where we got a lot of Schuhart's ideas from. And Deming, when he went to work in Japan in 1950, and he gave an important lecture to virtually all the leaders of Japanese industry. He presented what he called the Schuhart Cycle. Because the Japanese heard it from him, they called it the Deming Cycle, and it's gone into use as the Deming Cycle. Deming wrote about this cycle under continual improvement of quality. Deming was very much in awe of Schuhart. He described Schuhart as the master, and he says actually he presented the Deming Cycle, the Schuhart Cycle. It wasn't him who called it the Deming Cycle. This is what Deming presented in 1950. There are 4 parts to the cycle. And you can see the 4 parts in the diagram. The first part is, what are the most important accomplishments for the team? The second part, once the team has decided that, is the team will carry out the change or test decided upon. And then in the third part, the team will observe the effects of the change or test. And the team will study the results and consider what did we learn. And this will be repeated with the knowledge accumulated, and you'll move onward. Now, Sherard originally had 3 points in a line, and he actually changed that to be 4 points in a flow diagram, which is where we get the cycle from. There are people who have written papers saying that this is a significant addition to the scientific method. What Deming did is he really changed the language, he simplified the language. We still have 4 parts, you can see the 4 parts there, you can still see the same diagram. But he called it plan, do, study, act. The first part is the team will plan what the team will do. The second part is the team will do what they plan, they will build and they will test. The third part, the team will consider what went wrong and what was right. And the fourth part, the team will act and they will change the way of working based on the real results. So they will take what they've learned from the study and they'll take that forward to the next planning session. Deming spoke about this cycle as also as being a wheel. You can see in the diagram that actually it's described as a circle. So actually you can see it as a wheel that rolls forward. Deming said it's a wheel that rolls along the lines of concepts regarding product quality and a sense of responsibility for product quality. So as the team goes through each cycle, the team will be improving its knowledge of product quality and its sense of responsibility for product quality. The diagram being a cycle actually means that there's no hierarchy. You can see all 4 parts of the cycle within there, so they've all got a relationship to one another. There's a couple of points I'd like to make about the Deming cycle. Deming says the reason to study is to learn how to improve tomorrow's product. And he says everyone can take part. Everyone should have a chance to contribute ideas. Saki Imai said that Japanese executives recast the Deming cycle into the plan, do, check, act cycle. Deming didn't like this. He said that the plan, do, study, act cycle, his cycle is a cycle for management, and management should be using it and going through cycles and repeating the cycles. He didn't like the word check. It didn't seem to have the same weight as the word study. And he thought of the plan, do, check, act cycle is a cycle that was used by a team working on low-level problems on a production line. The cycles continue to evolve due to work by people like Karo Ishikawa. And it's also influencing people today. This is another book that I got from our office. You've probably got the book in your office as well, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. He has a cycle in here called Build, Measure, Learn. And you can see there's a diagram of it on the front page, a circle going round. There are lots of articles saying that actually this is the Deming cycle, and he's been very heavily influenced by it. When I first read about the Deming cycle, I was working with Sudi, and it all sounded rather familiar to me, and that's because I was working in a Scrum team. And when I read Jeff Sutherland's book, Jeff Sutherland being one of the 2 co-creators of Scrum, he says, Deming cycle is how Scrum product development is done. He said that when he trains people to do Scrum, he used the Deming cycle to ask people to make paper aeroplanes. And he finds that teams can make much better paper aeroplanes after they've been through the cycle 3 times. This is what Deming predicted. He said that quality will improve as you go through and use it. Sutherland also said that the retrospectives are the study part of the plan, do, study, act cycle, and it's important to move teams on to the act part. The other point I want to make here is when I read about the Toyota production system in Jeffrey Leimer's book, The Toyota Way, he says that the Deming cycle embodies the learning cycle in the Toyota production system. So in that way, you can see that the Deming cycle is about Agile because it's part of Scrum, and it's about Lean because it's also part of the Toyota production system. So I think the Deming cycle empowers us as testers because we use it. If we work in Lean or Agile teams, we use the Deming cycle. up to retrospectives. We have some of us will work in Scrum teams, some of us will work in other methodologies, but we're actually using the Deming Cycle. The Deming Cycle is about continuous improvement of quality. That's something that we all want. So actually we should feel empowered by that. We also should feel empowered because we can use retrospectives to raise issues that will help us improve quality, because that's what they're designed to do. That's what Jeff Sutherland designed them for. So actually, the Deming Cycle should help us feel empowered to improve quality. Now, I thought I'd move on to another part of Deming's philosophy, which is his 14 key principles for managers. Because the work we do is done in a context, and that context is decided by managers. These points were the basis for lessons to top management in Japan. Deming says adoption of the points is a signal that management intends to stay in business. And the 14 points apply anywhere to both small and large organisations. The first point is you need to create constancy of purpose for improving products and services. If good intentions are not enough, good work is not enough, you actually need to have a common purpose. I was talking to Deming's grandson a few weeks ago, and he said to me when he goes to see a board of people of a company, he asks them to all write down on a piece of paper what the purpose of the company is. They all write down on a piece of paper. They all look quite tired. They're working long hours. They're working really hard, and they're working on their objective. When they end up a piece of paper, they haven't all necessarily got the same common purpose. And it's obviously not a new thing because his grandfather used to do that as well. So this common purpose is really important. It's also really important because things change. Things have changed for us recently because of COVID. 3 years ago, we all worked in a different way. We all lived in a slightly different way. The products that people bought were all slightly different. We didn't buy so much online. We do buy much more online now. So actually things change. But also things change due to innovation. When Deming was a child, if you went into town, you went into town in a horse-drawn buggy. If you wanted to go faster, you cranked a buggy whip and the horse went faster. But very soon cars replaced the horse-drawn buggy, and the buggy whip manufacturers went out of business because they made buggy whips. But the replacement for the buggy whip in a motor car is really an accelerator. Deming observed that if accelerator manufacturers define themselves as accelerator manufacturers, they would go out of business eventually. I don't think they have. They must define themselves as something that improves the speed of moving vehicles, because I haven't heard about accelerator manufacturers go out of business as we move in towards electric cars. But common purpose, a constancy of purpose enables to cope with innovation and sort of changes of COVID are really important for a successful business. And Jeffrey Liker in his book Toyota Way says this always reminds him of Toyota and why Toyota is so successful in terms of sales and profits. Point 2 is you need to adopt the new philosophy. Now full of water. So you need to adopt this new philosophy because customers don't want to buy shoddy goods. They want to buy quality goods. And so you need to adopt this philosophy. Customers have a choice. Point 3 is you must cease inspection to end quality. And by that, you're talking about what you saw in the Japanese factory, where actually you had inspectors at the end of the production line, rather than trying to build quality in. And I think it's in many ways our challenge today is how do we build quality in? The phrase build quality in starts with Deming. It's something we're all trying to do now. We want to do that because we want to produce quality goods, and we want to do that because it's more efficient. Point 4 is the need to end the practice of awarding business on price alone and instead minimise total costs by working with a single supplier. Now here Danny is talking about a factory buying supplies in for the factory and actually how they're much better off, instead of trying to negotiate with multiple suppliers and get the price down on all of them, build a relationship with one supplier and improve cost and quality. But you know, it really reminds me of a story I heard once about a large company that hired a vendor to create its website. And the company was really pleased because they negotiated really hard. They got a really low price for their website. When my friend of mine went to work there and went in to see the vendor, he found they'd cut all sorts of corners to get below price. But one of the corners they'd cut is instead of using GitHub, they'd use the shareware alternative. And because the shareware alternative didn't have PRs, they didn't do code reviews. You can only imagine the quality of the website. The company would have been much better off agreeing to work with a particular vendor and then working with the vendor to improve costs and improve quality. Deming says we need to improve constantly and forever every process for planning, production and service. We need to do this because if we improve quality, there's this chain reaction: improve quality, improve productivity, and you can cut your costs. And actually, if you aim to improve constantly, it's better than having targets. One of the examples I read about was about car parts in a production line in America, and the production line found that car parts from Japan always fitted, and car parts from America sometimes fitted. And when they worked out the reason why, is the car parts had to be 500 millimeters long, and the Americans had set a target. There's a tolerance. If your car part was between 495 and 505 millimeters long, it was okay, as far as they were concerned. The Japanese didn't set a target. They just tried to get better. But their car parts were nearly 500 millimeters long. So actually their parts nearly always fitted. So actually this idea of improving, constantly improving, is far better than having a target. Deming says we need to institute training on the job. We all need to train on the job. We all need to retrain on the job. This is really what's very, very important. A company's assets, most important assets, are its people. And if you don't look after your people, you will have problems. He gives an example of an induction program, which doesn't tell someone how to be successful in the company, doesn't tell them what's expected of them, and that person will either leave or not be very successful. That's a big cost on the company. You actually need to have training so that people can contribute from day one and can contribute positively to the company. And he also went once, he worked with the Ford Motor Company, and he went to Ford's when they had a joint training program with the union, which was designed to improve the workers' English and maths. That's a really good thing. But the company wouldn't include basketball in the training program. Deming said they were wrong. They should include basketball in the training program, because if you learn to play a team sport, you learn to work as part of a team. And actually, when you're at work, you're working as a part of a team, so actually you can learn a lot of really good skills from basketball. So he said Ford should be allowed including basketball on their training program. And then he said we should adopt and institute leadership. He said a leader should be a coach and a counsel, not a judge. And that we need to move away from management towards leadership. Management, where people are looking over somebody's shoulders to check they're doing the job right, he dismissed as supervision. In his days, supervisors were the lowest level of managers. They weren't even regarded as managers, they were called the supervisors. So he actually dismissed the whole concept of this management as actually being supervision. We need leadership. And a leader is going to teach by cooperation, they're going to work by cooperation, and they're going to encourage people to work by cooperation. They're going to give people joy in their work, which is a different approach to management rather than looking over your shoulder. But we then need to adopt leadership. Point 8 is we need to drive out fear. He said fear is really damaging for companies. Fear is really bad because people don't feel able to ask questions. People don't feel able to answer questions. They want to protect their job. They want to protect their friends' jobs. So you're not going to get honest answers. For us, that's really important. We need to be able to ask questions. We need to be able to ask very naive questions sometimes very critical questions. So it's really important that fear is driven out. And he said that the word secure is really important in this case because secure comes from Japanese si, which is without, and cure, which means fear. So it means without fear. You want people to feel secure at work. Number 9, we want to break down barriers between staff areas. That means that we want teamwork across teams. And in this way, he's encouraging the use of systems thinking to try and improve business processes. If you think about within our team, it is quite easy, say, for a back-end developer to produce an API which is hard for a front-end developer to use. That could happen just within the team. But if you think about it across teams in your company, it is possible for a development team to produce a piece of functionality which is hard to use. And that will obviously affect customers, but it will also affect the customer support team, which will get more work. It's also important to have teamwork across teams because maybe when you've written a new feature, you used to testing with an idea, actually there's this use case, I need to go and talk to sales about that so they know about it. We need that teamwork across teams, because teams are not autonomous. We're all influenced by other teams, and we all influence other teams. So here, this is using systems thinking. Number 10, we need to eliminate slogans, exhortations, and targets for the workforce. We don't want to have slogans up saying, be a quality worker, take responsibility for your work. What this is doing is advertising that management don't know what their role is. And I know of a startup in North London where a finance company bought it, and they sent that startup cardboard slogans, which they were to stick up in all of the meeting rooms, and staff weren't very impressed, I have to say. So people are still doing that, unfortunately. Number 11, you need to eliminate numerical quotas for the workforce and numerical goals for management. This is because actually people will meet them. If there's a target, as in that production line, if the Americans were given a target of 495 to 505 millimeters, they'll meet it. And actually you're far better off improving constantly than you are by having a target. We need to remove inhibitors to good work and eliminate the annual rating system. There are a number of things that Deming saw as inhibitors to good work. He talked about the tools that people use. You've got to be given a good tool set, and if you've worked in a lockdown environment in a large multinational, then maybe you feel the tools you're allowed to use aren't always the right ones, and that can be a frustration. I would also think there are things like silos as well, which are a big problem. If you've got silos within your company, that's an inhibitor to good work because you're not going to be looking at how your work affects other people. But here I would also say that I think we need to challenge society's prejudices and biases, because if you're working in an entirely male engineering team, you're missing out on some fantastic engineers. I would say that if you're working in an engineering team that includes women who think they aren't being listened to, then in fact you're missing out on some great engineering skills as well. So I think there's a lot we need to do there. Point 13 is we need to institute a vigorous programme of education and self-improvement curriculum. Deming said we need to inspire people. You don't need to be learning things that are necessarily applicable to your job. It's really good if you're just being stimulated and your thought process are growing. We don't just need good people, we need people who are improving themselves. He encouraged education programs that people could take up and take a course that wasn't necessarily work related for that reason. And then lastly, we need to put everybody in the company to work accomplishing this transformation. Deming said that management will struggle with every single one of those points. Probably between us, we have seen managers struggle with all of those points. And I think one of the values of these 14 points is actually when you see managers struggle with one of those points, you realise it's not them personally. It's perhaps an issue that they're not aware of this sort of style of approach. They're not aware of leadership, say, or breaking down barriers, those ideas. And Deming also says that if you're in management, you have a problem with one of these areas, the way to approach it would be through the hiatus cycle, because you can plan an initiative to deal with a problem in an area, carry it out, study the results, and then act on those results and take it forward. But these 14 points make up a coherent philosophy. There's a really nice video on the Deming Institute's website when they show that the points all support one another. Each of the 14 points is implicit in all the others. The way not to depend on mass inspection, point 3, is to continually improve the process, point 5. To do that, you need quality supplies, point 4. And if finding a quality supply, remember constancy of purpose, point 1. The 14 points are all one philosophy. And we still struggle with some of these points. And as an example of that, I thought I'd talk about driving out fear. The first time I spoke about Deming was before COVID at a Skills Matter conference, and after that, someone in the audience came up to me and they said actually they were working in a climate of fear. And that's not only terrible for that person, it's actually terrible for that company, and it's terrible for that company's customers. When Deming talked about fear, he said, he gave these examples of people are afraid of losing their job, they're afraid of not having the right answer, they're afraid to admit a mistake, and some say their boss believes in fear. Deming said this was an issue. The first time we spoke about it, I could find it was 1978 in Tokyo. He argued that we should be dealing with these issues. Today we use a different sort of language. We talk about the need for psychological safety. It's exactly the same issue. And the fact that people have been arguing for the need for psychological safety for decades actually shows how hard it is to achieve. And with Deming's philosophy here, you see it as an obligation of management to deal with. So again, I think this is empowering because if you're working somewhere where there's a climate of fear, it's not your fault. It's a failure of management. These 14 points of management help us. Firstly, because this is a theory of management for the improvement of quality, productivity, and competitive positions. That's something that I want. These points provide support for creating a successful work environment. And when Deming said that management will struggle with them, when we see management fails, we see that struggle. And if we suffer under a manager who does not live up to these points, then these points help us see the problem. And it's not a personal problem, it's depersonalised, which I think is really good. Overall, these points should make us feel confident. For example, if there's fear in the workplace, it's not our fault, it's a management failure. So overall, what I would like to say is that for these two parts of Deming's philosophy, it helps us because his philosophy is about continuous improvement of quality, which is something that we want. He wants to build quality in, which is something that we want to do. And it also stresses the importance of psychological safety, which is something that we need as well. These are the references to the books that I used in the talk. And I'll finish with the final quote from Deming. We're here to learn, make a difference and have fun. If you've got any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them. Thank you.